My friends, Halo Infinite has a problem with its explosions and vehicle destruction. Is that a bit hyperbolic to say? Sure. But hear me out for a second. So 343 killed it with their art direction and vibes this time around. Forerunner stuff is back to that brutalist and ancient look we all know and love. The grunts got off their drugs, they're back to their old selves. And the Chief has never looked this juicy. The music, the look, the feel of Halo Infinite, it's the most confident Halo has felt in itself in years. One thing in the art that 343 still seems to struggle with, though, is their explosions. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a deal breaker or anything, but Infinite has some pretty rough-looking explosions and vehicle destruction, to the point that it can devalue the cool factor of what's going on around you. It's like when you're really immersed in an awesome action scene in a movie, but a moment of really bad CGI pulls you out for a moment. It's not your fault, it's just that, wow, that CGI looked really bad and I can't get my mind off it. So, let's go back in time for a second and figure out how we got here. In Halo 1, the grenade explosions were pretty snazzy and well designed. They look good. But the vehicle explosions, those were a bit unfinished looking. And you can't have that mismatch in a game. When it comes to explosions, it all has to be treated with the same love and care. With Halo 2, Bungie said, you know what? Let's make the best vehicle destruction of any console shooter. And damn if they didn't do exactly that. Now, vehicles had this sense of weight and depth to them. You could shoot the hood of a vehicle and the metal would deform and dent. Sometimes the metal would even curl and reveal the glowing alien circuitry or rusty UNSC pipes underneath, the veins and the lifeblood of the vehicle itself. Of course, this is just nice detail, flavor to make the vehicles feel more punchy and tangible. The real good stuff, though, came from the explosions. Like a bathroom trip following too much morning coffee, vehicles would just burst from the inside out. Scraps of metal would go flying, and all that was left was a smoking, smoldering carcass. It would be one thing if they just had this flat explosion effect, but even the detail in the animations was cared to. The suspension on the Warthog would bounce a bit. The ammo in the turret would actually ignite and snap the turret off of its mount. The Covenant vehicles themselves would also get this wonderful buildup as the circuitry inside of the alien technology overloaded. It felt like a lot of art and animation and care went into making the explosions feel real and sensible within the world of the game. It wasn't just an explosion effect placed over a vehicle. You could look at it and tell that the artist thought about how this vehicle would explode, and do it in a way that looked visually satisfying. And destroying a vehicle in Halo 2 was satisfying. So satisfying that Halo 3 followed the art and animation style of Halo 2. It didn't try to fix what wasn't broken, all it did was add a subtle bloom effect and some more detail to the explosion effect itself. Explosions were so satisfying by the time of Halo 3 that the game even used them as rewards for blowing up a vehicle. Halo 3's Scarab explosion was a visual celebration in the player's honor. Who needs a tacky hit marker sound when you're gazing into the downright volcanic meltdown of one of the Covenant's strongest land vehicles? You got the vibe that this thing was gonna blow any second. And then that final, violent eruption. It fills my serotonin-starved brain with that much-needed rush.
Well done, Chief.
Sadly, good times don't last. And when Halo 4 rolled around, it felt like 343, Halo's then new Shepard, just didn't give it their all when it came to the explosions and vehicle physics. You could tell that there was this lack of visual and audio polish, and the set-piece explosions in Halo 4's campaign especially were so just sterile and weightless that they felt like they were mocking you for expecting something like the Scarab. By the time Halo 5 rolled in, 343 had completely rebuilt and revamped the Halo engine, making it theirs. But something they left out in the coding was making sure that the engine could give us satisfying and impactful explosions. Vehicles still broke apart in Halo 5, sure, but they broke apart in the same way a toy would lose an arm, just popping the ball joint out of its socket. It didn't feel like vehicles were violently exploding, fireballs punching their way out of the engine, just tearing the vehicle apart. It felt like a toy, some cheap sparks, and just blech. The Kraken, Halo 5's equivalent of the Scarab didn't even get a celebratory volcanic explosion. You know what it did get though? It fell into a pit, and if you looked into that pit and you squinted, you could maybe see some cheap blue and purple clouds. That was it. That's what you got for destroying the Kraken. 2015 and 2016 were a time in the video game industry when explosion effects were at an all-time high. You had things like Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefield 1 that were just kicking it into high gear. And it's so sad to see Halo, the lord of good punchy visual explosions, fall so depressingly short. Now here in 2021, with Halo Infinite, 343 improved almost every area of their game design philosophy from Halo 5, bringing the art, the music, the sound, and the gameplay more in line with those classic titles. Halo Infinite feels and looks good to play, but there's one area where 343 still seems to honest to God struggle, and that's with their explosions and vehicle destruction. What's tragic is that Halo Infinite is such a damn beautiful game. Getting lost in the woods of Zeta Halo is so immersive. You get lost in this beautiful world until a vehicle or explosion goes off. And like that moment of cheap CGI in an otherwise good movie, it pulls me right out of the game. That classic Halo feel may be back, but the classic explosions most certainly are not, and it hurts, man, especially in this game. Throwing a grenade gives you this puff of lightless, sterile orange smoke. Firing a Scorpion tank round doesn't blanket the area in this thick smoke, making a blinding flash as the shell punches its way through whatever's in front of it. You just get this similarly impactless, sterile visual effect. And the poor Wraith shots, man, they took such a huge hit to their presentation too. What was once this blinding shooting star, this science fiction flaming trebuchet mortar, for Christ's sake, is now this small, itty bitty thing with no importance, artistic power, or weight behind it. It feels almost embarrassed to exist. It's like it has whatever the explosion equivalent of social anxiety is. It's scared to be noticed, so it's trying to be as small and impactless as possible. But nothing hurts more, man, than the vehicle destruction. Halo 5's Lego pieces are back with a vengeance, and this time they look even worse next to these beautiful models. In Halo 2 and 3, destroying a ghost frayed the metal. It curled in response to the heat and revealed the still sparking circuitry that made that machine work. The thing was bleeding out right in front of you, just draining sparks and embers on the ground. In Halo Infinite, you wouldn't be blamed for not being able to tell the difference between an intact ghost or a fully destroyed one. Hell, the UNSC vehicles are the same way. Look, the seats in this Warthog are still nice and clean. Remember the way that the inside of the Warthogs would smolder and burn like a crashed car in Halo 2's Through Reach? Now the explosions leave their vehicles so preserved that you could eat food off that clean, polished seat. And that sexy buildup that the alien vehicles used to have, the way that the ghosts and the wraiths would shake, rumble, bits and pieces of them would start combusting as the thing just built up and then finally burst, actual artistry and attention to detail was replaced with something so cheap that it makes Halo Infinite kind of look like it's a game with a very small budget. No sense that the vehicle itself is melting down. Just an ugly smearing of cartoon HUD goo on this vehicle. It's like they assumed that a hit marker visual effect would just be enough to get the job done, and so they gave up on making the explosions or vehicle destruction details have weight. What's strange is that this isn't universal. Halo Infinite does feature some pretty snazzy explosions, with my personal favorite being the grunt backpacks. So you see these silly pyramids that the grunts would lug around on their back? Well, it's full of methane gas, which they breathe. And want to know what happens when you poke a small hole in that pressurized container? Boom! Like a shaken soda can, these things just burst. And then what's cool is if you get close and look at the handiwork, the aftermath of the explosion, there's a lot of artistry left behind that you don't see in the vehicles. Look at how the metal looks torn and ripped by the gas explosion. Look at the sparks and crackling left by the damage done. Look at how there's still gas that's being leaked out periodically. Now this is a proper classic style Halo explosion that even puts in the effort and work into making the aftermath of it feel satisfying. Or what about the Sentinels and the Skimmers, which are just so damn satisfying to burst out of the air? This is that good stuff that the vehicles need. I'm not sure if maybe an explosion hurt somebody at 343 and now they have this grudge against explosions in general. But Halo Infinite's explosions could be so much more. Hell, they've proved that they're holding back when it comes to explosions if we look at stuff like the Grunt backpack. Could you imagine if the chassis and hulls of vehicles were violently torn open the same way that this poor little Grunt explodes? Game feel is an important part of how fun a game is, and the game feel of the explosions and vehicle destruction in Halo Infinite just isn't it, Chief, you know? But just because Halo Infinite is now technically released doesn't mean that the visuals must remain as is indefinitely. I'd love to see the art team, sandbox team, lighting team, and whoever come together and work on improving Halo Infinite's explosions and vehicle destruction. Bring them up to that Halo quality that makes us fans go bananas over something as simple as a needler melee animation. A lot of folks say that graphics don't matter and that only gameplay matters. But something I think we can all agree on at least is that good artistic presentation can and does make games feel more fun to play. It's the stuff that makes a game feel immersive, the way that grass will part as you walk through it, or how satisfying a good reload animation can be. And of course, how a nice game explosion makes us feel. Halo Infinite has an explosion problem, and thankfully, it doesn't need to be this way. In the comments below, tell me what game you feel has the best explosion effects, whether it's for specific vehicles, maybe a terminal, maybe buildings, or whatever. I'd love to try out some new games, and I'm a sucker for good explosion effects. If you agreed or enjoy the video, then consider liking and sharing it to your friends, family, maybe pets. And of course, a big thank you to all my amazing channel supporters. And with that being said, I'll see you all on the next video.